Welcome to the Spring 2018 Diversity and Inclusion and Entrepreneurship Summit of the Herb Keller Center for Entrepreneurship Growth and Renewal at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. It's a real pleasure to have you here today to discuss, to listen to our panel discuss a very important topic as organizations deal with building more diverse and inclusive workplaces. Thinking about driving ROI from diversity in entrepreneurship, how we can benefit from diversity in our cultures, in organizations, in products, and in other ways. So today we have an esteemed panel of people who represent a whole range of industries and a wide range of experiences across a wide range of countries, and over only a few short years. That's what we're going to say. That's the official line. Yeah. My name is Louis Martins. I'm the director of the Herb Keller Center, and I'm also the chair of the Department of Management at the McCombs School of Business. And I'll be the moderator for this discussion. Before we start with the discussion, let me do a little bit of introduction. Starting from the left, we have Ari Brish. He's an investor, advisor. He's been on board of directors, CEO roles, a whole range of experiences in energy and technology sectors. He's had numerous roles in Fortune 500 companies. He's been very active in business development between the US and Israel, and is a co-founder of the Texas-Israel Chamber of Commerce. And he served on the executive board as well as he co-chairs the Energy and Clean Tech Initiative Committee. Sorry. Next, we have April Downing. She's the Chief Financial Officer of WP Engine. She leads all aspects of the finance and legal departments, and previously also was in charge of the people department. She's raised over $200 million in capital and has managed 15 acquisitions in her various roles. She currently serves as the chairman of Helping Hand Home for Children's Foundation and is a member of the National Charity League of Austin. Next, we have Alejandro Ruelas. He has 18 years of experience in the beer industry.
Nice.
Or as I always call that, a good friend to have. And since then, co-founded LatinWorks, a cultural branding agency headquartered in Austin. He's considered among the top creative agencies in the Hispanic marketing industry and assists Fortune 500 companies in marketing their brands to the new consumer mainstream in the US. He serves on the boards of the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. and the Texas Tribune. And previously has served on the board of directors of Grupo Modelo, a Mexican beer conglomerate, but I don't ever tell you that. Next, we have Gretel Pereira. She is the Global Public Relations Vice President for HomeAway and co-founder of Latinos in Tech. She leads the Global Public Relations for HomeAway. She has a lot of international experience in over 16 years of agency, corporate, startup, and other experience. With a specialty in Latin American and US Hispanic markets. She's worked in other companies such as Evernote and Dell. She spent a year in Brazil. Jealous. She co-founded Latinas in Tech, a group of over 1,700 women who represent more than 12 countries and work at more than 30 of the top technology companies in Silicon Valley, Austin, and Mexico. And all the way on the right, we have Narubi Schlenker. She's a co-founder of Odoro, a web app that helps small and medium-sized e-commerce retailers manage their orders, inventory, and supply chain, and make sure you get all of your orders on time. She has an MBA from the McCombs School of Business, and while at McCombs, she was the president of the Entrepreneur Society. She's competed in the TVL Business Plan Competition, 3-Day Startup, and the ATI SEAL program. So, welcome to our panel. I'm honored to moderate this panel, not just because of the star power represented here, but it's also a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is how do we leverage the energy, skills, heart of everybody in the workplace and enable them to be successful in their own unique way. So given that the topic is diversity, I thought it'd be useful for our panelists to tell us how they conceptualize diversity. What does diversity mean to them? It's a word that can be interpreted many different ways and has had interpretations that have changed over time in the workplace. So let me start right in the middle. What would you say, Alejandro, is your conception of diversity in your own organization?
Well, in our business, it's really more about diversity of thought than anything else. It's people's perspectives and what they bring into the organization. We are primarily a marketing company, and our role is to help clients understand the problems that they have and figure out solutions to address them and to solve them. And we find that the more diverse of a population of employees that we have and coworkers, the more innovative the solutions, the more creative the approach. And so for us, it's not something that we do as an option. We do it as a necessity. And so yeah, it's really about diversity of thought more than anything else.
Do you want to add to that, April?
Yeah.
April. I agree. A lot of that has to do with that. I think a lot of times people originally and quickly go to gender, skin color, religion, but diversity comes in so many different forms. You can have people who have very different socioeconomic backgrounds. You can have two people who look exactly the same, but one could be LGBTQ, one could be straight. That may generate a lot of different opinions. You can have people from different political parties. So diversity is all of that. And I think one of the challenges that you have when you're starting an organization or when you're trying to drive diversity within an organization is making sure that you're accepting of all those different things and that you don't limit diversity into just maybe 2 or 3 things.
Excellent. We'll take one more perspective on the same question. No?
You're right. Go for it.
How about 2 more?
No,
Okay.
I started my career in corporate America, in Eli Lilly and Company, so big corporation. And diversity, when I started, I was 22, and diversity was defined as like underrepresented minorities, having groups within the organization. And so that was my image of what a diverse organization was. But now that I've started a company and we're small, we're only 17 people, diversity means so much more. I mean, it's exactly, I'm going to echo what it's been said, but it's the developers think very differently than our salespeople. And we're only going to grow if the developers can deliver what the salespeople say the customers want. So it's making sure that you're listening to everyone and making everyone feel included.
I was just going to add, echo everything everybody said. It's all about diversity and thought, different perspectives. But one expression that I really like that to me, because there's a lot of the difference between diversity and inclusion. What does that mean? And there's a really great expression. It's diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. You might have heard that, but to me, that's really a great way of defining it. Diversity is all of us. Let's all come to the party. But the inclusive is like really feeling that your voices are heard and you are part of it and you're part of the culture of your company, of your organization. To me, that's a really important differentiator that has helped me understand those concepts a little better.
Excellent.
And this may be oversimplifying diversity, but there's a saying in Spanish, cada cabeza es un mundo. I'm also from Venezuela.
Hey, Venezuela.
Yeah.
We just found out. Venezuela.
Yeah. But cada
Are you emphasizing similarity while you
Yes, diversity of thought,
yeah,
sort of.
Exactly. But there's a saying, cada cabeza es un mundo, which every head is its own world. Mm-hmm. So I think from the moment you get 2 people discussing an idea, you're going to get a diverse perspective. So that's oversimplifying diversity, but that's how I see it now.
Ari?
The graphical representation of what was just taught. Every person has his or her little box where he thinks through, but when you combine these multiple boxes and you draw a line around them, you get a much bigger box, which gives you a variety of contributions, a variety of solutions.
Excellent, and that actually leads me to my second question, because when we talk about diversity, of course there's the case for diversity being fun, morally right, things of that sort, but there's also this notion of ROI from diversity. And the basic idea is that diversity gives an organization something, and that can be a wide range of things. In your experience, what is gained from diversity, and what are the various aspects that you can leverage diversity for within organizations? Let's start with Ari.
There is a study done by Harvard Business School. They measured, they looked at diversity from 2 dimensions. One is what you were born with, whether ethnicity or gender and so on. The other one is learned attributes, what school you went to, what country you grew up in, and so on and so forth. And they looked on different companies, and they discovered that companies that has in their management teams at least 3 attributes of the inherent diversities and at least 3 attributes of the learned diversities did in the market share performance was between 40 to 70% better than companies that had a more homogeneous management team.
I feel super passionate about this. So WP Engine is a company here in Austin, Texas, and started in 2010. Over 50% of our executives are female. Over 30% of our team is non-white. We promote internally over 25% of our team every year. And over 30%, so we're a tech company, over 30% of our employees don't have a college degree. Now that requires a lot of investment, but the returns that we're seeing are phenomenal. So this is a company that in 7 years had $100 million. So really phenomenal returns on that. And I can tell you it's because of the people. We have over 30% of our employees come in via referral. We talk a lot about, we're known for our culture. We're literally in Fortune, we're named in a top 10 small and medium business for culture. And part of that comes from making a commitment to our employees to invest in them. And I can tell you the returns for that are phenomenal. Our NPS, if y'all know about Net Promoter Score, our Net Promoter Score is over 70. And if you guys know, like above 30 is really good. So if you invest in people and you bring in diverse thoughts, and you enable people who don't have that chance to get a chance to have a path within tech, they are so invested and they want that return for them to be able to invest in other people that are coming into the organization. So I can tell you for sure, it's the most successful company I've ever been a part of, and it's absolutely the most diverse.
Nice. Alejandro?
Well, you know, in a lot of companies like ours, it's all about the people, right? And the various perspectives, backgrounds, experiences that people have all add up to much richer, conversations and much richer ways of looking at the problems that you have to solve. In our particular agency, we are looking at the change that's taking place in the United States. And as we chatted earlier before we sat down, even though there's a lot of negative rhetoric right now associated with multiculturalism in the United States, especially coming from the political world, the reality is that American culture has changed permanently, and there's no going back, and it's going to continue to change. And it's changing because of the various perspectives that the groups that represent each of the various elements of society are bringing into the table. When you think about the impact that the new American culture is having on those who contributed to its evolution, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. The better you understand your target and the better you understand the way that consumers are thinking, the more successful you're going to be in the way that you target them. And you cannot do that unless you're inherently built from a diverse pool of perspectives and people who get this. And so you cannot underscore the value of it. Again, we were talking about this earlier. I come from a corporate environment where I grew up as a professional, many years ago. And in those days, diversity was a proxy for opportunity, equal opportunity for people. The understanding of the value of diversity really didn't happen until much more recently. And now everyone knows that diversity is key to the success of a lot of companies. And everything that April just said is super important. I mean, there's proof point after proof point that the ROI that you get from thinking this way is enormous.
Excellent.
I'll just echo everything. I think, being in the tech world, I have the perspective from a nonprofit of the organization that I've built over the last few years, working with tech companies and then working in tech and an organization like HomeAway. And it's refreshing to hear your perspective that it is about the people and investing in them. It's been great to see that shift of, the focus on the people. And yes, there's a lot of studies. McKinsey has also shown that a diverse workforce can lead you to 35% more increased profit. There's a lot of studies, but it's been refreshing to see a lot of tech companies embracing it because it's the right thing to do, and it brings innovation and diversity of thought. And HomeAway, for example, is very supportive of that, has been very grassroots. And I think there's been a shift of like, well, okay, yeah, that's nice, but show me the numbers and how am I going to make money by, hiring diverse people and different. So there's been I just love how it's such a forefront right now in discussion, especially in tech, such a priority. And companies are, yes, there's the ROI, but it's the right thing to do is a lot of what the companies are focused on.
And for me, it's hard to, it's just the way we operate at Ordoro. It's not like, oh, let's bring we're so small, like we are bringing everyone's perspective. So it's kind of hard for me to measure ROI at Ordoro because just the way we work. It's not, we are a very diverse team and we work together very well. But a personal story from my days at Eli Lilly, where I guess I kind of saw the effects of diversity is I was a Six Sigma black belt, so it's like a project manager, and I had a project, Kaizen, which is like a 1-week project. And I was assigned to work with the tax department. And it was a team of about 5 people. 4 of them were middle-aged, white females from the Midwest, like very similar culture, very similar upbringing, very similar schools, and I think 1 male. But they were, it was very much the Midwestern culture. They were all being very polite with each other, but there were some deep problems, and like tax returns weren't being filed on time. And once we got into it, not only did I bring the fact that I was from Venezuela, I was also much younger than all of them, so I was joking around and kind of broke down the barriers and the walls that were so ingrained within this team that was so homogeneous and being so polite to each other for so long. And it's still one of my most rewarding experiences because through this week, we were able to streamline all their processes, fix a lot of interpersonal issues that were going on. And I think it was by mixing it up, by introducing one person that was totally different, culture and age, and not part of the group for so long, that we were able to achieve those results.
Nice. Yeah. You clearly make a strong case for the value in diversity hypothesis, if you will. But we all know that human beings are tribal. And tribalism makes you gravitate to a similarity and the comfort of similarity for some people. How do you enable the creative friction of diversity and yet mitigate some of the potential downsides, which is greater conflict and those tribal sort of tendencies? What have you seen to work in terms of managing the 2 sides of diversity? Harry?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a risk of misunderstanding or miscommunication when you have a diverse team. I've been working a lot with different countries, with different businesses, and I can say almost made my career of bridging between Israelis and Americans. And you sit on a conference call, they both speak perfect English, but I keep texting each other. You think he said this, but he really meant that, and vice versa all the time. So to answer your question, one thing is to train people. All it takes is sit down in a classroom for a few hours and learn the other culture that you need to work with. The other one is cross-allocate people. We always had, when I used to work for Motorola, a big company, we always had expats working on both sides. So we had Americans working in Japan, in China, and so on, and we had foreigners coming to work here. I came here from our Israeli operation. Somehow I got stuck here, but the purpose of moving me here was just to bridge between the different cultures. And we had the opposite thing. So two things, the training and the cross expats between the two different countries.
Gretel? Any thoughts?
Well, I think several things. I think just personally, there's obviously a lot of that, and I think I work in a global role right now, and for example, one of my colleagues is here, but we spent 3 days of intense meetings, 200 actually in the same building, of people from all sorts of countries, and there's just so many different things to be conscious of recognizing that country, and when you talk global, make sure you're thinking of each country, and then if you forget one, it actually affects that one person. So just remembering those things are really important. I think taking it deeper, a lot of companies, like for example at HomeAway, there's trainings, like there's Harvard has a unconscious bias training that we make all of our employees take, where it's a very honest look on yourself, on just quick assessments on how you would react on certain situations. And you don't realize we all have an unconscious bias. So what we've done is we've done those trainings and then had open discussions about it, of being very honest, of like, oh, I didn't realize I have that. So I think it's part of that, having that open discussion, transparency, hearing other sides and being respectful of those other sides, admitting when you didn't realize something, and then learning maybe the different perspectives has been a really refreshing way to address those type of things that you may not realize, like, oh, I didn't realize I offended that person with such and such, or I forgot to talk about certain things, or really that open dialogue has created that environment.
Very nice. So before we can have the diverse interactions, we first need to have diversity. It appears that you've been successful at fostering diversity and including diversity. What advice would you have for someone who were interested in making sure that their organizations were diverse and inclusive? What needs to happen to end up with a diverse and, importantly, inclusive workplace? Let's have April start this one.
It has to start from the top, and it should start early on. Those are the things that, if it doesn't start at the top and doesn't start early on, you're probably going to have a lot harder time making it happen later. We're big believers at WP Engine that there's no silos. You may say, okay, well, what does that have to do with diversity and inclusion? As you were talking about before, different people within the organization, even engineers versus marketers versus salespeople, there is a difference of opinion, there is a difference of thought. And so when you talk about company first, it enables everyone to have a common language of what are we trying to achieve together. The other thing I'll tell you is leaning into conflict. You talked a little bit in the last question about how do you deal with conflict. We do something called Arbinger. So Arbinger is a mindset training, and we teach all of our employees this. And it's about not thinking of yourself, but putting yourself in the other person's shoes. It's about having an outward mindset. And when you think about it from an Arbinger perspective, you think about what impact am I having and what impact do I want to have. Again, you may say, well, what does that have to do with diversity and inclusion? When I'm closed and I'm thinking about my normal way of thinking, I can't be open to other people's perspectives. When I think about and adopt the other person's point of view and try to understand where they're coming from, I'm going to get really curious. Like, why are you so against this plan? You keep coming in and I'm feeling like you're being defensive. Like, why is that? Like, help me understand that. And when you start asking questions, you learn. And when you learn, you open up your mind. And so again, starting early, having leadership, really make sure that you're thinking about ways to include others. You know, y'all have talked about that too, of listening to other people, hearing that perspective. That can help breed it. The other thing I'll tell you that is sometimes really hard because we're really passionate is, as a leadership and as an organization, I believe that if you really want to have a diverse organization, you cannot polarize in anything. That's really hard. So having an organization that is open to LGBTQ, having an organization that's open to ultra-conservative thinking, having an organization that is open to people working from all different locations and embracing people who have accents. Like, all of these are things that you have to be open to. And once you start closing in on anything and saying, oh, I'm going to polarize in one way, shape, or form, you are limiting your ability to really be diverse and inclusive.
Alejandro?
You know, the thought of mindsets is really, really interesting, and it's something that we've been playing around a lot with, because there's a little bit of a contradiction in the way that we think about things. So for us, for example, as marketers, we try to focus on consumer similarities, because it gives you the ability to have your investment go further and potentially be more effective. If you can figure out what are the different ways in which people are thinking alike, it allows you to target them, you know, in ways that work better. But those doing the targeting at the same time, we know that similarities are actually very negative, because they limit your ability to think, and to think in creative ways. So while we are trying to make sure that the workforce is as multifaceted as we can, and well beyond the old definition of diversity, it's no longer about, you know, ethnicity or that sort of a thing, not even in terms of lifestyle. It's really more about the experiences that people have and how they think about it, because they cannot understand the best way to go to market without having that richness of thought in place. And so for us, as I said, you know, we started as a multicultural agency focused primarily on a specific cohort of consumers. And we have sort of, over time, graduated and evolved into thinking way more about this concept of alike thinking, because it's rich territory when you're targeting, but it is the opposite when you're thinking about it from an interior perspective. So.
I think that diversity actually begins with inclusion, because if you start a company culture that is not inclusive, as much as you're going to hire diversity, you're going to lose diversity. And not just, you might actually retain diversity, maybe you're paying them a lot, but guess what? They're only going to bring half of themselves to work. And so you could hire a very diverse workforce, but if you don't allow people to be themselves and really bring their whole selves to work, and I think this echoes the point that you were making, April, like if you don't allow an environment where you're really like letting everyone be themselves, then you're only, then you're not really embracing diversity.
We actually use that almost every day, bring your whole self to work.
Yeah.
So it absolutely resonates.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't leave part of you in the car.
No. Sometimes I do, and it's really embarrassing.
Great.
I don't think I have anything else to echo. I think everything was really well thought of.
Excellent. Actually, you did, all of you have spoken pretty strongly about how it needs to begin at the top, but it's also a bottom-up process. What do your organizations do to hold line managers and folks who are running the day-to-day operations of your business accountable for fostering inclusion and diversity?
I would love to give an example, at least, of what I've seen, because I've seen both perspectives of working at, I used to work at Dell, and we had really wonderful affinity groups or employee resource groups, as they're called. So those are, or if you're not familiar, each company many times has groups of Latino organizations, and you meet as Latino employees to get and connect with each other. You have Black, you have LGBT, so it's different affinity groups based on your background. So Dell was it's a well-oiled machine. These groups are really well established, and I joined HomeAway about 2 years ago, and we didn't have these groups. We had a women in tech organization, but that's it. I was like, what? There's no Latino organization? So I'm very passionate about this. So I immediately, and it's terrible, but I started kind of like, hey, Latina, vamos, let's go have lunch, and let's bring the ones together. So my point is that it started very organically and grassroots. But what I love about HomeAway is that we embrace that. Like we really now we have an Asian American group that wants to start because the employees want it. So that's a really powerful way of excuse me.
One culture I learned from one of the companies I worked in the past, the Silicon Valley is a very diverse place, right? So This company was a pretty mature startup, maybe 100 employees, 200 employees, something like that. The CEO made a habit to celebrate every holiday there is. And he assigned one of the employees that represent that ethnic group or that country to organize the party. So this company had a company party almost every week, just because there is a holiday somewhere in the world, and they celebrated it in the company. I thought that was a pretty cute way to do it.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool way of literally celebrating diversity.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know, I'll add something to that.
Yeah.
I think that in some cases, yes, I mean, companies want to hold people accountable for ensuring that they're being smart about their hiring, et cetera. But the reality is that if you do buy into the idea that results are driven by this kind of thinking, what's going to happen is that if you're not delivering results, it's likely because you don't have a diverse workforce. So it sort of becomes an organic thing. I mean, you don't even have to think too much about it. If you start thinking about the people that you're bringing on board on the basis of how they think and how they, how they represent their opinions, by definition, you're going to end up with a diverse team.
Let's turn a little bit. I've been having you speak so far about diversity conceptually and in your experiences in organizations, a lot of them in large organizations. We at the Kelleher Center are all about creating new businesses and enabling, facilitating, encouraging new business formation. We asked you to serve on this panel, obviously, because you're good at the fostering diversity and inclusiveness. What advice do you have for someone starting out a business today to build this idea of diversity and inclusiveness and inclusion and benefiting from diversity and inclusion? What should they do from the ground up to have that built into the DNA of the business? You want to start, April? Yeah.
Sure. I think I said a little bit earlier about really it has to start from the tone at the top. And so if you're starting a business and you don't believe in the power of diversity and inclusion, I can pretty much assure you you're not ever going to achieve a really good mix around that. When you think about it, we talked a little bit earlier, when you're starting really truly doing a startup, it's usually probably you and maybe one or two other people. That's probably not going to be very diverse, right? But it's really about how do I, as I go out and I add more people, how do I make sure that I'm conscious about making sure that I look at lots of different profiles, look at lots of different people. And as you were saying, I'm going to steal some of your stuff because I thought it was really good. It's, you talked a little bit about third parties, right? Who are the third parties around you? Part of your third party when you're doing a startup are your advisors and your board. And a board member, in fact, I encourage you, don't just have investor board members. Like, use advisors, use independents very early on. Use that as a mechanism to help bring in a different perspective. I can promise you, if you do a startup and you create a board and it is just your investors, you're not going to have a lot of diversity of thinking. And I can tell you what, too, they're going to be focused on very different things than you're going to be. So start it early on. My second thing is build a company based upon values. Talk about those values. Live those values. Write down those values. Make sure that you're revisiting them all the time. WP, as I said, has a great culture, and we're renowned for that. And people say, how do you keep your culture from changing? And I say, we don't. Our culture changes all the time. You want your culture to change. You want to bring in new people that are accretive to the organization, that bring in a different perspective. You don't want the same thing. So we celebrate bringing in people who have different backgrounds. But what you want is people who are aligned to your values. So if you can keep those two things in mind, I think you'll be off to a pretty good start.
Harvey, since you're building a business?
I would say find co-founders that have very different skill sets than you do. Because if you're both good at the same thing, you're going to suffer early on. You've got to find co-founders that have a completely different skill set than you do. And I think after the co-founders, the first hire we had was our director of design. No one had that skill set in our team. And then our next hire was someone to help us with customer support. But one of the things, and she is amazing, still works for us. One of the reasons we also hired her is because she was so organized, and no one on the team was. So really, it's the need of the business is going to dictate who you hire. But just, I guess my number one advice is make sure your co-founders and you have a very complementary and different skill sets.
I'll give a little bit of a different perspective of just from the organization that I built, Latinos in Tech. We started about 4 years ago. I was living in California in Silicon Valley, and I didn't know a lot of people that were similar to me. So it's a little bit of a different perspective on diversity. This was kind of more uniting similar voices and similar, but yet we're all different. Even though we might be from Venezuela, there are different, whatever country you're from, but kind of united by a similar goal of being in tech and trying to grow your career. So it started very simply of just us getting together every few months. And what I think worked for us, and I see it as my startup, is it was just a small group. I didn't think big. I didn't think like, oh my God, I'm going to have an event and I need to have 100 people there because it's big and I need numbers and everything. It just started really authentic in the sense of inviting those people that have those similar passions, that think differently, but yet in the same goals. So that would be my advice, to just kind of start very authentically and transparently, because then it just grows and you attract either similarity, or you start to grow the organization. Because for us, we grew because of that authenticity, the conversations we were having, yet the similarities that brought us together. That organization slowly started growing with different people that had that similar passion, and we were connected. But then now we see the tech companies that want to work with this type of organization because they see that diversity yet similarity. So that's a little bit of my perspective.
Alejandro?
I would just say to people that are in the audience that are thinking about starting a company and don't want any co-founders, surround yourself with people that have other skills than you do, and ideally surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. That is a formula for success. I'm not going to tell you that we did that in our company on purpose. I think we did it out of necessity. Oftentimes there were a lot of things we just didn't understand, and we needed people that knew what the heck they were talking about. And little by little, we ended up in a place that was filled with people that were way smarter than we were in their individual disciplines. And I think that was a big reason for the success. You get to a point where you're pinching yourself and going, wow, we're doing really well, and I didn't do anything. So it's a good thing.
I doubt that.
It's a good
Kind of
thing.
business.
Yeah.
Ari, do you have a perspective on
Well, April stole
I
my...
stole
yeah.
it.
But
See, you should have given me
I
answers.
do have a story about that. When I worked at Motorola, we had... The culture of Motorola was to be super polite, and if there is a disagreement, you barely... If you're not an insider, you wouldn't even know there is a disagreement, because people tiptoes around the disagreements to find a solution without offending anybody. But we had these two vice presidents. One, I make up the countries and the name just not to offend anybody. One VP was French, one was Argentinian, and they never got along. They always fought, and the culture of disagreement in these countries is butt the head. So one day this French guy was promoted, and he called the Argentinians and say, would you come to work for me? And this guy told him, never agree on anything. Why do you want to hire me? And he said, because we never agree on anything. I want somebody to give me the other perspective.
Excellent. Just as important as doing the right thing to have a diverse and inclusive workplace is also avoiding mistakes. You all have a range of experiences in various companies. What have you learned from their mistakes that you've sought to avoid in your own thinking about how you build your workforce? Any salient mistakes that come to mind?
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? I will be the first to say, look, there's been so many times, especially as a CFO, that I have not helped things go right in this way. I talked a little bit earlier about how much investment is required. If you're really going to give people an opportunity where they didn't have one before, you got to do a lot of education, you got to do a lot of training. Our employees, we do over 20,000 hours of internal training and development for 500 employees. That's a lot. People who don't have a college degree, we invest in 3 months of onboarding and training. That's a lot. And I can tell you in other organizations where we didn't have the leadership that really believed in creating opportunities for different people, for opening up our minds to having different conversations, it really did go down to ROI. It really came down to what are the hard costs and what can we afford. And I can tell you, I am fully converted to the value of investing in people. And if you put that early on and you really stay true to it, the outcomes are just phenomenal. But it's hard, especially I'm sure in small companies when you're bootstrapping and getting going, or when things, maybe the business isn't going right, it's easy to say, I'm not going to invest in those things. But I can tell you, investing in that doesn't always have to cost a lot of dollars, but the more you can spend, the better. So I can absolutely tell you, I've screwed it up lots of times of saying, no, we got to have a better cost per head count. And now we've moved from calling people head count to calling them people or employees. So it's small shifts like that can make a really big difference. It's really hard.
You do legs.
We do an employee
division.
count there.
If you count the legs, then you have twice as many people as you have. That wouldn't work.
That's why it's called
I was
a
just
head
going to
count.
add that something that I've seen, again, being in the nonprofit, but then tech, kind of both sides. But something I've seen is, I feel like right now everybody's talking about diversity and how important it is in tech, and that's great, but sometimes it's inauthentic. So I guess that's my common theme today, is be authentic and transparent, because as an organization, for example, Latinas in Tech, I've seen that shift in the last 4 years of, before it was like, now everybody, like we have like Facebooks, Googles, all wanting to work with us and money, and that's great. But literally there was a specific example of one company that I had one of our board members, Latinas, working at that company, and the company said, the founders or whatever were like, oh, let's give 2,000 to Latinas in Tech, it just looks good. So that hurt her, and that just showed like, oh, no, I don't, like, great, we'll take your money, but like, I mean, just kidding. No, but I mean, it's just, don't just throw money, like be authentic as a company, because that just like, I wouldn't want that money. Like I would want it to be like, well, I want your employees to volunteer, I want you to host an event for us, I want your employees to be mentors, I want you, there's a different way to engage authentically with those type of organizations versus like, it's the right thing to do. First of all, don't ever, like it looks good, like don't ever say that. But that's one example that I felt in the last few years where, unfortunately, you see a lot of companies jumping on the bandwagon because it looks good for them to be doing X, Y, Z in diversity, and just make sure it's authentic, because you can see right through it.
Let me jump off of that, because increasingly we hear from our students that they want to join organizations that are genuinely interested in diversity and inclusion. Across the years, we've seen that demand go higher and higher. At the same time, we see the demand for working in growth stage companies, tech companies, go higher. Given your experience, what advice would you have for our students in figuring out whether it's real or whether it's PR? How do you look behind the PR and know that this organization that they want to join really does value diversity and inclusion?
I would ask, as part of the interview, like how is conflict handled in this organization? How are mistakes handled in this organization? I think the answer to both of those questions, if I disagree with someone's opinion, how does that come across? I think the answer to those questions is really telling on how the company values inclusion. And I just want to add one little thing about the prior question.
Oh, absolutely.
One mistake that I think, since all three co-founders come from the corporate world, when we started the company, we were anti-process. Because I think that too much process, and I think big corporations do this, kills creative thought, kills diversity, like it kills people bringing new ideas, because that's just the process. So I think that's one mistake that we saw in prior opportunities, that we've tried to limit the amount of process, and it's easy when you're small. I know it's a necessary evil as you get bigger, but limiting processes, I think, is a big win for diverse thinking. So that's all. Yeah.
I would say that for students that are wanting to determine whether a company has that commitment to diversity or not, because we are living in different times now, it's as simple as look at their standing within their particular category. if it's a tech company, if it's a healthcare company, whatever the category might be, automotive, etc. Look at their standing within that particular category of business, and if they're growing fast, if they happen to be public, look at how their stock is performing, and you're undoubtedly going to be able to correlate easily the success of a company and the dynamic growth of that company with the type of commitment that they have to diversity, because it's inescapable today.
Social media.
Yeah.
You gotta look at social media. If a company is out there and investing in the community and investing in different types of organizations, that's going to come through in social media. The other thing is when you're interviewing, does everyone have the same background? Kind of getting back to your perspective on, does everyone seem to be the same? When you ask them about their experiences, do they all have the same experiences? Has everyone just gone from high school to college to this job, and is there any diversity of thinking around, oh, I took off a year to go do something, or oh, I'm from here? Like, ask questions. Remember, you are picking that company as much as that company is picking you. So that is your time to ask lots of questions. And if you feel like you're not getting it, you should ask to speak with their HR or their employee experience team to just say, hey, I just want to know a little bit more about how you handle things like diversity. And if you feel like you're not getting it, ask to speak to those people. And if they say, no, that's not appropriate, you don't want to go work there.
Totally agree. We think too much alike. So let's say you go to work for General Motors, you just go to LinkedIn and sort by General Motors and just look at the first 3 pages and the faces, and you know how diverse they are. The other thing, when you interview, ask to also talk to few people that are at the same rank that you are being interviewed to, and you can pick the people. You look on LinkedIn, I want to talk to this guy and this girl because whatever, they went to the same school, or they came from the same country, or they have the same color skin, or whatever it is. Ask to talk to a few people. And at Motorola, we had this, always the part of the process was you are being interviewed by the hiring manager, you are being interviewed by some of your peers, and in some cases you are being interviewed by the people that are going to be working for you. So you have both from the top, from the sides, and from the bottom interviewed.
Yeah, I would just add, kind of in summary, I totally agree with everything. There's certain things, like in addition to social media, read about them, obviously do your research about the company, but are they involved with different organizations? What have been their standings? A lot of companies release diversity reports, annual diversity reports, so you can see that they're very transparent about, especially tech companies, well, we're like 4% Hispanic, and they'll show the percentages of ethnicity. So it's out there, so you can research it and see that, but I would also look and make sure it's been consistent over a while. It hasn't been, oh, they just participated in this one event, they did this one thing. Like, it's a company that's constantly out there, constantly partnering with different organizations, and has a voice in it. That's really important. And definitely ask about the culture. To me, really important when I go interview as well, is just to understand the different things, like what I talked about, affinity groups or employee resource groups. Do those exist within the company? Is it supported? Because that, to me, is a really important factor of it's an open company that really supports that culture. So I think all of that is really important.
Very good. So I'm one head count, totally homogeneous head. Actually, the color is sort of diverse nowadays. But so that we can have a broader range of questions, actually, I'd like to open it up for a couple of questions from the audience in some time. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and unconscious bias, it's as an employee of that company. So we talk about that as a culture, but there is actual in the training for interview questions, unconscious bias. So for example, at HomeAway right now, our recruiting team is hosting different trainings with hiring managers and different teams to how to ask questions that do not, show that unconscious bias. So I think it's a lot of companies have that it's throughout all of it. One, it's building the culture, but then it's through that hiring process to make sure you're asking the right questions. And people are very direct, like, oh, I don't know, is that question like indirectly asking it? So it's training anybody who's going to be going through that interview process, the type of questions that eliminate that unconscious bias, I think is a one way. I don't know if you have another example.
Totally, we doing the same thing. And then the other thing that we do, at least on the engineering side, is that we do blind coding tests so that you don't see the individual and so you can't have any bias. The other thing that we do is because we do have a diverse team across multiple geographies, we actually will have people with different backgrounds interview as well to try to assess, at least maybe suss out some of that too.
Any other?
Is the other side of the coin, it's a matter of training of the managers, of the hiring managers. The other side of the coin is exactly the opposite. If you feel you like this candidate because they went to the same school or they look like you, the other candidate doesn't look like you, coming from a different school, whatever, this one has some few bonus points, just from a diversity point of view. But when I was hiring people at Motorola, I always push myself towards the people that are most different.
Good. Another
That's not easy to do.
There is no, again, I personally value diversity. You're rare. Maybe. So I'm trying to share how I make myself in my hiring consideration. If I have a candidate that is 4.0 and all they did is just get their parents' money and got through school at 4.0, the other candidates 3.0 and had 3 jobs, I hired the 3.0 that had 3 jobs, always. That was my philosophy all the time.
Just to be clear, you shouldn't get a job as an excuse for your 3.0. Yeah. Just want to be clear.
I would just add one point.
You must be a university professor, right?
Yeah. I would just say that there is a lot of, I don't know if it directly addresses your point, but there is a lot of the other side of it, right? Of people that are like, well, I don't want to be hired just because I'm a woman. I don't want to be hired just because I'm a Latina. And so I think, people, it can be very heated, right? People are like, well, I don't want to I don't want to have quotas that, you need to hire 30% of women, because then you get in a very delicate line. And so there's people that are very passionate about both ways. What I've found is that it helps to at least bring somebody, make sure you have a diverse pipeline and people that you are interviewing in the process. Companies like Facebook, for example, at least have one person that is different to you. Like that's what, at least one diverse candidate has to be in the interview process. Then it comes down to skills and qualifications. I mean, I think it's getting in the door, but at the end of the day, it's about, are you a good writer? Are you a good engineer? Do you have the talent? So I think it's it's getting through that pipeline, making sure that's diverse and having different candidates that you are talking to. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, at least, you have to be a good writer. I don't want to be hired just because I'm a woman and I'm a Latina.
You focus on exactly what you said, what's going to maximize revenue. And I mean, you're basically making the decision on what's going to maximize revenue and minimize cost, and it's very objective. And you want to hear everyone's opinion, but you're ultimately going to pick what at least you believe is the right option with the group's input. But I would just say focus on the objectives, the results. It's not about, I like this person more, so I'm going to, no, it's what's going to have the maximum return.
So honestly, it's an ongoing debate. Like what we created initially was kind of a safe space for women to share a similar background. And so we have a private Facebook group and we share, things that are private to us, that maybe the struggles or a challenge of a hiring manager that I felt was biased, or, so it's a private space. So one side of it, it's creating that private and comfortable environment. So we host events where mainly it's women and we talk and we learn from each other and we ask each other really open questions that maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable in an environment like this where there's so many different perspectives. That's one side of it. What we're finding is that we need to broaden it, because and we're even thinking about, like first it was like, okay, let's have women only, but then now we're being even, racist in our own way, so it is an ongoing. So let's open it up. So we're having men as allies. Like we think of it as allies, because we can't just have women talking about what our challenge is. If men don't hear it, they don't know what it is. So it's actually an ongoing, and we're having panels. One of the future ones will be how we can support each other together and opening it up. But it is an ongoing, because we do want to create kind of that safe space where women can share and be open. But we understand the importance of the allies and creating that community and having that shared thought so that we can learn from each other, because otherwise we kind of close ourselves off and we won't. And unfortunately, I mean, the reality is that many senior positions are held by white men. So If we're just the women talking to each other, we need to bridge it and open it up and to have allies. So it's kind of an ongoing debate. I don't know if that answers your question, but. Yeah, it is. It is a silo.
I think that it doesn't, you don't get the diversity unless you start mixing those groups and there's honest conversation there.
Absolutely.
I understand the safe space.
Yeah, because I think one of it is building that strong foundation as a community, and then broadening it, and then opening up those bridges to those other communities and the allies.
One more question.
I think a lot of that, and I'll be the first one to address it because I think a lot about that. You may go, it's a white girl up there. Okay, well, I'm a first generation to go to college. So that's something that's very different that you may not have perceived about me. We do struggle with making sure that there is a diversity of every different sort. A lot of that comes from, I talked about referrals are really important. So what we find is when you find a diverse set of people who feel comfortable in that environment, you get more of those. And so what we've actually found is that there are underrepresented demographics within our organization. So I can tell you what we're doing about it because we're at the size and scale where we can too. So this cannot always happen when you're 30, 40, even 100 people. But at 500 people, we have an opportunity to say, look, we want to be more proactive about getting more diversity in. And so we are underrepresented in African Americans. And so what we're doing is we're partnering with a company that's in Africa who actually helps employ people who are underemployed and tries to get them into tech. And they try to train them up, and then they can become an employee of yours. But that is a very proactive thing that we're able to do because we're able to make those investments. But I would just say, when you look at it, don't always go by the visual because there are definitely things behind the scenes that make people diverse. If organizations really want to have that diverse thinking and thought, they need to be cognizant of where they are underrepresented, and if they can do something about it, they should. But it's an investment again, right?
I will also address the composition issue. We did invite a broad demographic, and we were turned down by some. It's just a very busy week with E-Week going on, and the allocation-wise, it ended up that the people who came did not include it. Yeah. You had a question?
I'll answer from the side of WP Engine, but I probably hate to tell you that I think we're a different company. And so I can tell you where I would aspire other companies to be to and what we aspire to be, which is not just traditional students. We try to hire from not just mainstream colleges, and we also, as I said, we try to hire people who don't have college degrees. That again is a very conscious thing. When we have students who come out of college, we actually typically get the atypical students, people who've maybe taken off a year, people who maybe kind of bounced around a little bit in school. Maybe they did, their undergrad in something and their graduate degree in something else. But for us, the name of the school you went to and getting a 4.0 doesn't matter. It's all about how much do you want to really have an impact and how much do you align with our mission. Now I can tell you most other employers I've been with, it's you went to a top name school and you got the top grades, right? So I hate to say it's probably still the reality of today.
Unless you code.
Yeah.
Unless you code. Yeah.
Well, I'll add to the question that you had. I think that, like in our case, being an agency that's been very focused primarily on a particular ethnic group for a long, long time. We're evolving now and getting a little bit broader. There was a point in time when I was very uncomfortable calling ourselves a multicultural agency because, quite frankly, we weren't really being terribly multicultural. I'll tell you that we've never done an ad targeting the Asian American community in the U.S. Probably 99% of the work that we've ever done has been focused on the Hispanic market up until a few years ago. We're now becoming much more of a mainstream agency, but when we tried to get African Americans to join our organization because we want to be more multicultural. We want to be able to sell an understanding of the African American consumer to clients. We had a really tough time getting African Americans to want to work with us. Now, over time, as we evolved and became a little bit more mainstream in our approach, we were lucky enough, up until about less than a year ago, our chief of strategy was an African American guy from Chicago who was outstanding. And when we lost him, I mean, it was a huge loss. We haven't been able to recover from that. So we do subscribe to the idea that as we change and as we move forward, we are going to inevitably need that, because my first comments, I think with the first question, was about how American culture is changing. I think we can argue that Hispanics have had an inordinate amount of influence in terms of that change, but no one can deny the fact that probably the most influential group in the way the country is changing, culturally speaking, is the African American community at all levels. In fact, I'll tell you, our son, we have a 17-year-old son who is my stepson, my wife's son. His dad is a white guy from the East Coast, and he claims that he is an African American guy trapped in a Puerto Rican body. My wife's Puerto Rican, and he's always saying that because our son. That's what I'm talking about. Our son. See, he's like that. That's my wife up there, by the way. And so he says that at home all the time. I was in the car with him today. He's a swimmer. He competed here at UT, and we're going to lunch, and I'm in the car with him, and he's wanting me to listen to all of these rap songs that are ultimately the proof that music is evolving into a better place. I like Mexican music and Hispanic stuff, so it's hard for me to relate, but that is the kind of thing that's going on. The younger kids are changing the way that they view the world, and that's American culture. So all of us who are in business are not going to have much of a choice but to either accelerate our learning in terms of understanding the richness of how the culture is changing and how African Americans are having an impact on it, or we're going to have to hire people that can get us there faster. And those that can get you there faster are those who have been living that experience, from birth. So it's a challenge, and it's an opportunity, and I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that happening in the marketplace. Yeah.
We'll let you answer.
Excellent, folks. We're almost at the top, but the 2 cents was left. Now we are complete. I want to thank our panel, which insights. You can tell that somebody decided not to wear jeans and add diversity to the clothing over here. I was looking down going, these people are quite homogeneous.
It is entrepreneurship.
It is entrepreneurship, that's right. It's the uniform and tech. Thank you for your insights. We really appreciate you giving your time. Thank you all for coming. And do come to other panels that we have. We have the Diversity and Inclusion and Entrepreneurship panel twice a year. The fall one is going to be focused on ecosystem supports for founders and startups that represent diverse backgrounds. So please come to that and to other events of the Herb Keller Center. And one more round of applause for their thoughts.